I dropped out of college at 20 to raise my two younger siblings after our mom died. I worked two jobs for 8 years and put both of them through school. They didn't invite me to either of their weddings. I gave up my 20s to raise them. I worked two jobs so they could have the lives our mother wanted for them. They built those lives and quietly removed me from them. My name is Joel Carver. I am 41 years old, and I was not invited to either of my siblings' weddings. I want to say that plainly before I say anything else, because everything that follows is context for that sentence, and I do not want anyone to lose track of it. I was not invited to my brother Caleb's wedding 3 years ago. I was not invited to my sister Priya's wedding last year. I found out about both of them from photographs on social media. Caleb's first, then Priya's. Celebrations I did not know were happening. Photographs of people I love standing in the best moments of their lives while I was in Memphis, not knowing those moments were occurring. I dropped out of college at 20 to raise them. I need to tell you who we are and where we came from before I tell you what happened, because the story does not make sense without the beginning. The beginning is a Tuesday morning in October when I was 20 years old and a sophomore at the University of Memphis, sitting in a lecture hall for an 8 o'clock class I did not particularly want to attend, and my phone buzzed in my pocket, and the number was a Memphis area code I did not recognize, and something in me knew before I answered that it was going to change things. It was a neighbor of my mother's. She said my mother had had a stroke the previous night. She said she was calling from the hospital. She said I needed to come. My mother did not survive the stroke. She died the following morning, which was a Wednesday, which was the kind of ordinary weekday that has no right to contain the end of someone's life, but does anyway. She was 43 years old. I understand now, at 41, in a way that was not available to me at 20, how young that was. She was 2 years older than I am now. She was in the middle of her life, not at the end of it, and she died in the middle of it, which is one of the particular cruelties of strokes. They do not wait for a good time. My mother's name was Dina. She was a practical woman, not given to sentiment, who raised 3 children largely alone in a house in Memphis on a single income from a job she had held for 16 years. She worked as an office manager for a construction company, scheduling, billing, keeping the administrative machinery of a business running. Work that required competence and reliability, and that she gave both to, every day, for 16 years without complaint. She kept the house clean and organized. She kept the refrigerator stocked. She attended every school event she could make it to. She had a particular way of sitting at the kitchen table in the evenings after the dishes were done, with a cup of tea and sometimes a crossword, that I have never been able to see replicated without feeling the specific weight of her absence. She was not a demonstrably affectionate person in the way of some mothers. She did not say I love you easily or often. What she gave instead was presence, consistent, reliable, unglamorous presence. She showed up. She handled things. She did not make a show of her sacrifices, and she did not ask us to witness them. She simply made the life work by the force of her will and her steadiness. And that was the way she expressed love, and I understood it even as a child, and I understand it better now. My father left when I was 12, which made Caleb 3 years old and Priya not yet born. He moved to a state I will not name. He sent money for a few years, inconsistently, in amounts that never quite covered what was owed, and that arrived on no predictable schedule. Then he stopped sending it. My mother did not speak about him often. When she did, she spoke practically. Here is the situation. Here is what we have. Here is how we are going to handle it. She did not perform bitterness, and she did not perform forgiveness. She simply continued. I have always found that the most impressive thing about her. When she died and I needed to figure out who might help, my father was not a consideration. I called him once, from the hospital, because it seemed like the thing to do. He expressed condolences and said he wished he were in a better position to help. I do not remember the rest of the conversation. I do not remember much of that week except in fragments. My mother's sister Patricia drove in from Nashville and stayed for the week of the funeral. She was good to us during that week, present, helpful, kind to Caleb and Priya in the way of someone who genuinely cares and is genuinely overextended. At some point during that week, she sat with me at the kitchen table, the same table where my mother had sat with her tea and her crossword. And she was honest with me in the way that honest people are honest when honesty is the kindest available option. She said she could not take in 3 children. She had 2 of her own, a mortgage, a husband whose work schedule was unpredictable, and a life that was already stretched to its capacity. She was not in a position to absorb Caleb and Priya. She said it plainly, and she said she was sorry. I believed the sorry. I believed the impossibility of it. I thanked her, and I meant the thank you. I was 20 years old. Caleb was 11 and in 5th grade, old enough to understand what was happening, young enough that it was visibly unmooring him. Priya was 8 and in 2nd grade, old enough to understand that her mother was gone, not old enough to process what that meant for the long shape of her life. Our father was in another state and was not coming. Our aunt was not in a position to help. There was no one in the family who was situated to take on what needed to be taken on. So I did it. The decision did not arrive with a dramatic clarity. It arrived the way most real decisions arrive, which is gradually, in the space between one inadequate option and another, as the available alternatives contracted until there was only one left. I could place Caleb and Priya in the foster care system and return to my life. That was an available option. I thought about it for approximately 2 days, during which time I watched my brother eat cereal at 7 in the morning with the look of a child who was trying to hold himself very still, and my sister asked me 3 times in one day when things were going to be normal again. And I understood that placing them in the system was not something I was going to do. I withdrew from the University of Memphis the following week. I went in person and I filled out the paperwork, and the advisor I met with said, "Are you sure?" And I said I was sure. I moved back into the house. I filed for guardianship, with help from a legal aid organization and from Patricia, who knew someone who knew someone. I went back to the distribution center where I had worked summers since I was 17, and I talked to my supervisor, and I got my job back at full time. And then I found a second job doing weekend deliveries for a furniture company, and I made the mathematics of the 3 of us work because making the mathematics work was what was required. That was 21 years ago. I want to be specific about the length because the length is part of what I am asking you to understand. Not months. Not a year of crisis followed by a return to normal. 21 years have passed since the Tuesday morning in October when my phone rang in a lecture hall. And in that 21 years, I have not returned to the life I had been building. The civil engineering degree I had been 2 years into is unfinished. It is still unfinished. I am 41 years old, and I have a career in logistics management, and I am good at it, and I find it meaningful, and I am not asking for anyone's pity about it. But I want to be precise. The specific life I was building when my mother died no longer exists. I built a different one. I built it around the 2 people I was responsible for. And now those 2 people have built their own lives in cities far from Memphis, and I found out about their weddings on social media. Those years were hard in ways I have run out of ways to accurately describe. Not all of it was hard. There were good moments, real ones, the specific pleasure of watching children grow and become themselves, the satisfaction of being present for the things that matter. I went to Priya's school plays. I helped Caleb build a model of the solar system for a science fair project that he was very proud of, and that took up half the kitchen table for 3 weeks. I watched both of them navigate middle school and high school and become people I liked being around. There was love in those years. There was genuine love, and I want to say that clearly because I do not want the difficulty of what I am about to describe to crowd out the love. But there was also an exhaustion that had no scheduled end point, and a loneliness that was particular and strange. The loneliness of a man in his early and middle 20s living an entirely different kind of life than everyone around him, who could not stay out late or take weekend trips or make plans that extended past his responsibilities, because there were 2 people who required his presence on a schedule that had no flexibility. When my friends from high school were figuring out who they were in bars and apartments and new cities and road trips, I was figuring out what to make for dinner for an 11-year-old and an 8-year-old with what was available in the house. I am not asking for sympathy about this. I made the choice. But I want to be accurate. The life I was living was not the life that most people my age were living, and the gap between those 2 things was something I felt every day for years. I helped Caleb with homework at midnight after double shifts, sitting at the kitchen table in the light of the overhead fixture, both of us tired in different ways. Him from the ordinary exhaustion of being a child, and me from the particular exhaustion of a person trying to be everything. I drove Priya to school in the mornings and picked her up in the afternoons when I could arrange my shifts. And when I could not arrange them, I made arrangements with neighbors and with Patricia, who drove in from Nashville 3 or 4 times a year to give me a weekend that was something close to my own. Those weekends were precious to me in a way that is difficult to explain to someone who has not spent years without them. I missed my own college graduation because I was at a fifth-grade science fair. I said that already, but I want to say it again because it is the specific kind of thing that accumulates into a decade. I miss things. Not dramatic things, not events that I would have made into major stories about my life, even if I had attended them. I missed the ordinary accumulation of a young adult's life. The parties and the trips and the random Tuesday evenings that don't amount to anything specific, but that together become the texture of being young in a way you cannot reconstruct later. I miss that texture. I lived a different texture instead, and I chose it, and I do not regret that choice, but I want anyone who is listening to understand what the choice contained. Caleb grew up. He was a good student, not exceptional, but solid, the kind of student who showed up and did the work and understood that the work was connected to something beyond itself. He played basketball for 2 years in middle school and quit when the social dynamics of the team became something he did not want to navigate. He developed an interest in numbers and economics and business that became clear by the time he was in high school, and that pointed in a direction I encouraged. I filled out the financial aid forms with him. I helped him write his college application essays, not by writing them for him, but by sitting across the table while he wrote and asking him questions when he got stuck. When he was accepted to a school in Atlanta, I was genuinely proud, in the uncomplicated way that a parent is proud when a child succeeds at something that was hard for them to reach. Move-in day was a Saturday in August when Caleb was 18 and I was 27. I rented a truck and we loaded it with everything he owned that was worth taking, which was not much, and I drove him to Atlanta. We unloaded in a dormitory parking lot in the heat. We built his bed frame together with instructions neither of us fully understood. We went to dinner at a barbecue place near campus, and we talked about what he was nervous about and what he was excited about and what he thought the year was going to be like. I drove back to Memphis alone that night. I pulled into the driveway after midnight and the house was very quiet because Priya was asleep and the particular noise that Caleb made in the house. The television left on, the footsteps on the stairs, the sound of another person existing in the same space, was no longer there. I sat in the driveway for a while before I went inside. Priya went to school in Nashville 4 years later, when she was 18 and I was 31. The 4 years between Caleb's departure and hers were different from what came before. Quieter in some ways, more centered around her and her needs specifically, and marked by the particular feeling of a relationship that was becoming more equal as she became more herself. She was a different kind of student than Caleb, more driven, more focused, more certain about what she wanted to do with her life. She had decided by 16 that she wanted to work in healthcare, and by 18 she had a clear enough plan that I mostly just needed to help her execute it rather than help her figure out what she was working toward. I sent her money every month during her undergraduate years. Not large amounts. I was not in a position to give large amounts, but consistent amounts, the kind of small, steady contribution that takes a financial pressure from critical to manageable. She called me on Sunday evenings sometimes, and we talked for an hour about her classes and her friends and the version of herself she was becoming. Those calls were good. They were easy in the way of conversations between two people who know each other well and do not need to perform. I drove to Nashville for her college graduation. I stood in the stadium for the ceremony for 3 hours in May heat, and when she crossed the stage I cried. I have never told anyone that. I cried because she had done the thing, because the path from 8 years old and asking when things were going to be normal again to a college graduate in a cap and gown was a real path that she had walked, and I had been there for all of it, and it was done, and it was good. That was 10 years ago. In the 10 years since, things have changed in ways that I understood only gradually, and that I am still working to understand. Caleb graduated, moved to Atlanta, and began building the life that the financial aid applications and the kitchen table study sessions and the move-in day truck had pointed toward. He got a job at a financial services firm. He was promoted twice in 4 years. He moved into an apartment and then a condo. He met Claire, who grew up in a wealthy suburb outside of Atlanta and whose family was established in a way that Caleb's was not and had never been. He told me about Claire during a phone call, and he sounded happy in a way that I was glad to hear. I liked hearing that he was happy. That was a true and uncomplicated feeling. Then I stopped hearing much. The calls became less frequent, not dramatically, not in a way that set off an alarm, just gradually less, in the natural drift of adult lives moving in different directions. I told myself this was normal. Adults build their lives, and the communication patterns change. It is not a betrayal. It is just the shape of adult relationships between people who live in different cities and have different schedules. I told myself this for approximately 3 years while the calls went from monthly to occasional to a birthday and a Christmas. Caleb got married 3 years ago. I found out on a Wednesday morning in May when I was scrolling through my phone before work, and there it was, a photograph of Caleb and Claire in wedding clothes. Behind them was a reception in full, tables set with flowers, people in formal attire, the specific visual texture of a wedding celebration that has been well planned and well attended. The photograph had been posted the previous evening by one of Claire's bridesmaids. There were several more photographs in her post. Caleb looked happy. Claire looked beautiful. The event looked like everything a wedding is supposed to be. I sat with my phone on my kitchen table for a long time. Then I called him. He answered after 3 rings. His voice had the quality that voices get when they are managing something, slightly flattened, slightly too controlled. I do not think he was surprised that I was calling. I think he had been waiting for it. I said, "Caleb, I'm looking at photographs of your wedding." He said, "Yeah, I was going to reach out." There was a silence. I let it be silent. He said it had been a small wedding, intimate, just close friends and Claire's family. He said he had wanted to keep it manageable. He said he had thought about inviting me, but, and here is the part one will carry for a long time, he said he was not sure how I would fit in. He said his world in Atlanta was different from Memphis, and that Claire's family was a certain kind of people, and that it was a formal event, and he just thought it would be complicated. He said he was sorry. He said he knew how it sounded. He said he hoped I would understand. I asked him to say again what he had said about not being sure how I would fit in. He said he thought there would be an awkwardness. He said his Atlanta world was a particular kind of world. He said he had not wanted me to feel uncomfortable. I want to be precise about this, because I have been precise about everything else in this story. My brother decided that the man who had dropped out of college at 20 to raise him, who had worked 2 jobs for 8 years, who had sat at the kitchen table with him at midnight helping him with homework after double shifts, that man might not fit in at his Atlanta wedding because of the particular kind of world my brother had built in Atlanta. He decided this. He made this calculation. And then he did not invite me. And he did not tell me the wedding was happening. And he sent me a belated explanation only because I called him when I found out. I told him I had heard him. I told him I needed some time to think. We said goodbye and I went to work, because that is what you do. I went to work and I did my job, and I did not tell anyone what had happened because I had not yet figured out how to describe it to myself, let alone to another person. I have never told Caleb everything I have said in this account. I have not been ready for that conversation, and I am still not sure what I want from it, whether I want his explanation or his apology or his acknowledgement or something else entirely. What I know is that the sentence he said, that he was not sure how I would fit in, is a sentence that contains a verdict about who I am in relation to who he has become, and that verdict says, "You are from the before, and the before does not come to the after." Priya's wedding was last year. I found out about it the same way I found out about Caleb's, a social media photograph, posted by someone who was there, showing my sister in a wedding dress standing next to a man I did not know, in a ceremony that looked beautiful and intentional, and that I had no knowledge was occurring. I did not know she was engaged. I did not know there was a wedding being planned. I received a birthday text from her in March of that year and a Christmas text the previous December, and nothing in between that would have given me any indication that a major event in her life was approaching. I have not called Priya about the wedding. I have thought many times about calling. I have begun the call in my head, run through the possible versions of the conversation, and each time I arrive at the same place. I do not know what she would say, and I am not sure I am ready for any of the possible answers. She might have an explanation. She might not offer one. She might say something that makes it worse rather than better. The silence she has maintained, the birthday text, the Christmas text, nothing more, tells its own story, and the story it tells is not one that invites me toward hope. What I feel about Priya is more complicated than what I feel about Caleb, which was already complicated. With Caleb, there was at least a conversation, however inadequate. There was the sound of his voice. There was his acknowledgement that he knew what he had done was not the right call. There was a person on the other end of the phone who was managing his discomfort in real time rather than through absence. With Priya, there is only the absence. 3 years of gradual reduction. The Sunday phone calls that stopped. The birthday text in March, the Christmas text in December. Nothing in between. No explanation. No invitation to a conversation. No acknowledgement of any of the things that came before. She was 8 years old when our mother died. She was the child I read to at bedtime. She was the child I took to her first day of middle school, standing outside the building with her for an extra 5 minutes while she worked up the nerve to go in. She was the teenager I sat with in a school parking lot for 40 minutes one afternoon, both of us in the car, while she cried about something that had happened with a group of girls and told me things she had not told anyone else. She was the person who called me on Sunday evenings from Nashville and talked for an hour. She was Priya, my sister, my responsibility, and my love for more than a decade. And now she sends me a birthday text in March and a Christmas text in December. And last year she got married, and I found out from a social media post, and she has not said a word to me about any of it. I have done a great deal of thinking about what this means, and I have not arrived at a single answer that satisfies me. What I have arrived at is a set of possibilities, each of which contains something true. It is possible that Priya has constructed a version of her past that minimizes what I was in it, that she has told the story of her life to her husband and her Seattle friends in a way that made me smaller, made the Memphis years smaller, made the sacrifice smaller, until the person who raised her became a background detail rather than a central figure. It is possible that she finds the reality of what I gave her uncomfortable, that it creates an obligation she does not want to feel, and that the way she has handled that discomfort is by reducing contact until the obligation fades. It is possible that she has convinced herself the distance is normal, that adult siblings drift, that geography explains it, that she is not doing anything wrong by building her life in Seattle and sending a birthday text and calling that enough. I do not know which of these is true. Perhaps all of them are partly true. What I know is that the outcome is the same. I was not invited to her wedding. I found out from a social media post. She has not explained. I am 41 years old. I live in Memphis in a house I have owned for 9 years. The house I bought once the two people I was responsible for had launched into their own lives, and I had enough margin to begin building something of my own. I work in logistics management, and I am genuinely good at it. And it is not the career I had been heading toward when I was 20 years old in a lecture hall, but it is mine. I have friends in Memphis who know the outline of this story, but not all of its specifics. I have a life that is, by the measures most people apply, a full and functioning one. What I do not have is the relationship with my siblings that I believed I was building for 21 years. What I believed was that the sacrifice and the presence and the showing up, all of it, for all of those years, was not just a practical arrangement, but a bond. That the people I had raised would carry that bond into their adult lives, and that I would be part of those lives in a real way, not just in the form of a birthday text, not just as a background figure in the story they told about where they came from. I was wrong about that, or I was right about it once, and it has become wrong, and I am not yet sure which of those is more painful. What I need, the only thing I need, is acknowledgement. Not money, not a specific action, not a dramatic reconciliation scene. Just acknowledgement of what the years contained and what they cost, and the understanding that leaving me out of the biggest celebrations of their lives without a word is not something you do to the person who raised you, and call yourself honest about what that person was to you. I am 41 years old. I work in logistics management, which is the natural progression of the distribution center job I took at 20 to keep my siblings fed and housed. I am good at it, and I find meaning in it, and I do not feel contempt for the work. But I want to be honest about this. The career I was building when my mother died was in a different direction. I had been studying civil engineering. I was 2 years into a program that I had worked hard to get into and that I had a genuine talent for. I left it. I have not gone back. I have considered finishing my degree more than once over the years, and I have not done it. And the reason I have not done it involves the time and the money and a kind of fatigue that goes deeper than the practical obstacles. I am not a ruined man. I have a life in Memphis that is genuinely mine, work I do well, people I care about, a neighborhood I belong to. I am not telling this story from a place of devastation. I am telling it from a place of needing to be accurate about what happened. What happened is this. I gave a decade of my life to two people I loved. I gave up the particular version of my 20s that I had been building toward, the career, the freedom, the accumulation of an adult life in the normal sequence that most people experience it. I gave those things without resentment. Because the alternative, leaving an 11-year-old and an 8-year-old with no one, was not something I could do and live with myself. I gave freely and I gave completely. And those two people, once they had the lives my sacrifice helped them build, quietly removed me from the version of themselves they were presenting to the world. I do not think it was calculated. I want to be careful about that because the people in this story are people I love and I do not want to assign motives I cannot verify. I do not think Caleb sat down and decided to cut me out of his life. I think he built a new life that felt separate from where he came from, and that I was part of where he came from, and that the version of himself he was presenting to his Atlanta professional crowd did not include the part of his story that involved a brother who dropped out of college and worked at a distribution center. I think he found it easier not to integrate those two things than to do the harder work of integrating them. I think he made a decision that served his comfort and cost me something significant, and that he convinced himself it was a neutral choice. It was not a neutral choice. There is no neutral choice in leaving someone out of the biggest day of your life. Priya, I understand less clearly. Caleb at least answered when I called. There was a conversation, however inadequate. There was a person on the other end willing to be present in the discomfort, even if only to offer the wrong explanation. With Priya, there is only the absence. There is no explanation because there has been no conversation because she has not created space for one, and I have not yet found a way to push through the silence without knowing what I would find on the other side. I have thought about calling her the way I have thought about very few things in my adult life, turning it over repeatedly, from different angles, trying to figure out what I would say and what she might say and what I would do with whatever she said. I have started that call in my head dozens of times. I have not made it. What stops me is not fear exactly. It is the specific uncertainty of a person who does not know what they need from a conversation and therefore cannot begin one with any confidence that it will give them anything worth having. What I want from Priya is not complicated in theory. I want her to say, I know what you did for me. I know what it cost you. I know that leaving you out of my wedding was wrong, and that the gradual silence of the last 3 years has been wrong, and I am sorry for both of those things. That is what I want. It is a short list. It requires her to look at something she has been looking away from and say it out loud. I do not know if she is capable of doing that. I do not know if she has even fully reckoned with what she has been doing, whether she has examined the gradual reduction of contact and named it to herself as a choice rather than a drift. People have remarkable capacity to not examine the things they do not want to examine. She may have told herself a story in which what happened between us is simply what happens when adults grow up and move to different cities and build different lives. That story is available. It is a comfortable story. It does not require her to sit with the specific weight of what she left out of the narrative, which is that the brother who is now just a birthday text in March and a Christmas text in December was the person who raised her. I think about the version of myself who was 20 years old, standing at my mother's kitchen table the week after the funeral, making the decision that would define the next 2 decades of my life. That person did not have full information about what he was agreeing to. He did not know that the children he was choosing to stay for would one day become adults who did not invite him to their weddings. He did not know that the decade of sacrifice would produce lives that eventually did not include him in any meaningful way. He made the decision with the information he had, which was that 2 children needed him and that he was the only one who could stay. I do not blame that person. I do not wish he had made a different choice. I understand why he made the choice he made, and I believe it was the right choice given everything he knew at the time and everything he was. But I want to be honest about this. If he had known, at 20, that this was where things would arrive, that Caleb would marry Claire in Atlanta without telling him and offer an explanation about not fitting in with his crowd, that Priya would marry a man in Seattle and send him a birthday text in March and a Christmas text in December, I do not know what he would have done with that information. I do not know if it would have changed anything. I think it might have broken something in him to know it in advance. I think the not knowing was part of what made the choice bearable. I am 41 years old. I am the age my mother was 2 years before she died. I think about that sometimes, the specific proximity of it, the fact that she did not get to see any of what came after, that she did not get to see Caleb in his Atlanta condo or Priya in her Seattle life, or me in the house I finally bought at 32 when I had enough margin to do it. I wonder sometimes what she would make of all of this. Whether she would understand what happened, or whether it would simply break her heart. I think it might have broken her heart, because she was a woman who understood debts and obligations and what people owed each other after everything had been accounted for. She would have understood this debt. She would have known exactly what it consisted of and who owed what to whom. I also wonder whether she would blame herself, whether she would think, I should not have died when I did. I should have made different choices, been healthier, been more careful, survived longer, so that the weight of the three of us did not fall on Joel at 20. I do not want her to feel that, wherever she is. She did not choose when she died. She did not choose to leave 3 children and 1 adult child who was barely adult enough to know what he was taking on. She did the best she could for the years she had, and the stroke that killed her on a Wednesday morning was not a choice she made. I want to be clear about that. I do not hold my mother responsible for any of what happened after. What happened after was made by the choices of living people who had options. I have been in Memphis for my whole adult life. I have thought sometimes about leaving, about what it might look like to start fresh somewhere, to be a person in a place where the weight of the last 21 years was not embedded in the geography, where I was not driving past the school where Priya had her first difficult adolescent social experience, or the arena where Caleb's basketball team played their home games in middle school. I have not left. I am not sure I will. This city contains my mother's grave and the house where I raised 2 people and the specific texture of a life I built from almost nothing. And there is something in me that is not ready to leave those things behind, even when those things carry weight. I have friends in Memphis who have known the shape of my story for years without knowing all of its details. They know I raised my siblings. They know I gave up a lot to do it. A few of them know that the siblings did not invite me to their weddings. What none of them know, what I have never told anyone in full, is the complete account of what it cost, and what came back from it, and what I am left with at 41. That is what this is. This is the full account. What I have decided, after a great deal of time sitting with all of it, is that I am going to stop managing these feelings in private and start saying them out loud. Not to wound anyone, not to demand a specific response, but because carrying something in silence for years does not make it smaller. It makes it heavier, and I have been carrying this heavy thing alone for long enough. I deserve to say what happened. I deserve to have it heard. And I believe that somewhere, there are other people who have done what I have done, who have sacrificed for someone they loved, and then found themselves outside the life that sacrifice made possible. And those people deserve to know that what they feel is legitimate. What I feel is legitimate. What I gave was real. And what was done with it, the quiet removal, the social media discoveries, the birthday text in March and the Christmas text in December, was not fair. That is the whole of it. That is what I needed to say. And now that it has been said, I intend to stop carrying it alone. I gave 21 years to this family. I have earned the right to put down the part that was not mine to carry. Have you ever given a decade of your life to someone else's future, only to find yourself outside of it once that future arrived? Have you ever discovered that the people you built a life for had quietly built their lives somewhere you were not invited? Have you ever been the person who showed up for every hard moment, every school play, every midnight homework session, every college application, every move-in day, and then found out that when the good moments came, the celebrations, the weddings, the best days of their lives, your name was not on the list? Leave your story in the comments. Because sacrifice is not a transaction that gets repaid with interest, but it is a covenant. And when the people you sacrificed for quietly step outside that covenant without a word, that is a wound that deserves to be named out loud rather than carried alone in the silence of a city where the geography of what you gave is visible everywhere you look. If you believe that a man who dropped out of college at 20, raised 2 children through their entire childhoods, worked 2 jobs for 8 years so they could build their lives, drove them to college on move-in day, and cried in the stands at their graduations, deserves to be at their weddings, hit that like button and subscribe. Because Joel was not asking for the world. He was not asking for gratitude on a schedule or acknowledgement at every turn. He was asking for a seat at the table he helped build. They sat down to eat without him. That was wrong. It was simply and plainly wrong, and it deserves to be said. Hashtag I raised theme and they left me out.